more on the how
ಓಕೆ
you say the business needs. Here they are like an user needs. Yeah.
ಕಾಲ್ ಮಾಡು. ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಇವನು ಶಶಾಂಕ್ ಮಾಡಲಿಲ್ಲ ಆಮೇಲೆ.
Refined to make it as a requirements are called user stories.
ಇಲ್ಲ ಇಲ್ಲ,
And the
ಅವನು
same,
ಒನ್ ಆಫ್ ದಿ ಇದು ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಲೆವೆಲ್ ಇದ್ದಾನೆ ಈಗ ಎ ಜಿ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿಗೆನೆಯ.
yeah. For example, this is a format,
ಒಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಅಂತ
mostly the standard format, which is used by everybody. Like this is how you should write a requirement as a customer of a web shop or whatever the portal, food delivery app, for example. I would like my personal information to be protected from access by third parties,
ಸ್ಯಾಂಕ್ಷನ್ ಬಂದಿದೆ ಎಲ್ಲ
and then I should
ಅವುಗಳನ್ನ
explain
ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ.
so that it
ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ
can't be
ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಹೊರಗಡೆ
exploited
ಜಾಸ್ತಿ
for their
ಇದನ್ನ ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ
purposes.
ಎ ಜಿ ಕಾಲೇಜಲ್ಲಿ ಎದ್ರುಕೊಂಡು ಹೊಡೆ
So
ಹೋಗ್ತಾರೆ.
this is one example of a security story which should be written.
ಕಳಿಸ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾನೆ.
And then most important
ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ
aspect of
ಪೊಲಿಟಿಕಲ್
security story is also the acceptance criteria.
ಅಲ್ಲಿ
So acceptance criteria defines on,
ಈಗ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್
in order to ensure the above
ಅಂತ ಏನಂತಾರೆ
defined user story, then you can give bit details, much more requirement details on the acceptance criteria. So
ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾನೆ ಹಂಗೆ ಹಿಂಗೆ.
in the above definition, we just said it must be protected. We didn't say how and why. And below in acceptance criteria, we also explained a bit more. So to ensure the data transfer from a customer browser to a web browser, we expect you to encrypt with TLS. Yeah. This is a security requirement to implement a TLS 1.3. And here we also say ensure that only authenticated and authorized users have access to the customer data, because we don't want people who are not logged in or don't have a proper access to see or modify our data. And that's why we say ensure only authenticated and authorized users have access to the customer data. And then we say ensure that only authenticated and authorized users have access to the database, means not just viewing or the customer data, you should also restrict the access to the database. And like this and so on. So you can keep on extending to achieve this two-line objective above. That is, as a customer of a web shop, I would like my personal data should be protected from third parties to avoid them exploiting my data. And this two-line objective of security can be implemented using these acceptance criteria below, which can be the way I explain now. It can be the TLS encryption. It can be about authorization and authentication, or how do you ensure the communication between the different components and APIs are secure. Like this, you can keep on adding a requirements in a acceptance criteria. Yeah, this is a format of security story. And then there is an opposite of it is called evil story. So evil story is nothing but you write it from an attacker point of view. The same requirement, instead of you thinking as an security engineer, you think like an attacker. And here, as an you is an attacker. As an attacker, in the previous case, I said as a customer, like as a user, and now I say as an attacker. I would like to access the personal data of all the users from this food delivery app, or in this case, the smartwatch example is given here, so that I can take all the user data and publish them to damage the reputation, or I can do the ransomware, I can ask for money, or whatever the objective I want to achieve. So security objective is more on how do I use and secure it, and evil is how do I break and how do I make monetize it. Yeah, this is the opposite of it. And again, here the acceptance criteria for this is then opposite side. Here we are not telling about technologies to protect. Instead, we try to detail down what is the our goal, what is our interest. My interest is on a personal data of age, name, gender, and so on. Maybe geolocation, mobile phone numbers, whatever interesting information I get it from this website is my acceptance criteria. So I, as an attacker, has to achieve if I get all of this data from the database. Yeah. In a simple definition, is this stories of user story and evil story? Any doubts from any of you? What is the user story and what is an evil story? You have to write anyway for different user stories and evil stories in the further lectures and in the exam. But now just try to understand what do they mean and how they differ from each other. Any questions here?
ಮತ್ತೆ ಅದೇನೆ ಇದು ಒಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾನೆ ಇದೆ ಚೆನ್ನೈ ಇದು ಹುಡುಗಿ ಅದೇನೆ ಅವಾಗ ಅದೇ ಇನ್ನೊಂದ್ಸತಿ ಕೇಳ್ಬೇಕಷ್ಟೇನೆ ಅದು
No questions?
ಫೆಬ್ರವರಿ 14th ಇದು ಮಾಡಿದ್ನಾ
Okay. Looks
Well, I've
like
understood about the user story and the evil story, but why is it like why we need it?
yeah, why we need it is, like I said, this there are some frameworks. Yeah, you might have heard about agile framework. You would have heard about Scrum methodologies, which are not a standard way of handling requirements. They handle in terms of user stories. There are some organizations, companies, some development models follow standard requirement process where they use the stakeholder requirements, analyze them, implement them, and so on. But there is another set of frameworks like Agile framework where they exactly follow this format. They use the user stories and we just added security to it. We are not defined our own. So when you are handling a project where you handle the user stories, then you should go for a security user stories and evil stories. When you go into a project where there are no security stories or user stories, you are instead handling a standard V development model where there are customer requirements which are defined into a system requirements, software requirements, and there is a structural process. You don't need a user story there. Yeah.
Yes,
This
yes,
is clear?
understood.
This is
Yeah.
another framework,
ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ
and some companies use it, or many companies use it.
ಅದೇ ಹೇಳಿದ್ನಲ್ಲ ನಾನು
Okay.
ಹಾರ್ಡ್ವೇರ್
Yes.
Then the evil stories to capture a
ಅದ್ರ ಮಧ್ಯೆನೇ
negative side or opposite side of it. So some things about user stories are not directly requirements. Like I told you, they are at the high level objectives. They are not really the detailed requirements on what to do. That's why if you also read this, you will not be able to implement anything if you just read this, if you are a developer. Yeah? Because usually requirements are detailed enough to implement. So what do you do in this case? So they are not detailed requirements, yeah, but rather they are just an
ಅದೊಂದು ಅವನಿಗೆ ರಿಮೈಂಡ್ ಮಾಡು ಮುಂಚೆನೆ ಒಂಚೂರು PPT ಅಥವಾ ಕೋರ್ಸ್ ಮಟೀರಿಯಲ್
initially say I want to achieve this, and then you detail analyze it and come up with detailed requirement, and then you make them agree on what you are going to implement. Yeah, these are very short and easy, and they to read and understandable to all people. So when you write a very detailed technical requirements, sometimes the stakeholders or the users, they don't understand it. When you say I'm going to give you TLS 1.3 with a detailed encryption using AES 128, and I'm able to give a high level of availability, I will implement a zero trust. If you explain all this, the customer will be blank. He says, I don't care. I just need a secure system. And for him, if I say this, maybe it's more easy for him to understand. He knows that I am trying to protect the personal data. That's it. You want to know how, in such a detail of different things, maybe it's difficult for some stakeholders to understand it because it's most not technical experts. Yeah, and also they represent a small increment of valued functionality, and it can be developed in a period of weeks. That's what, like I said, it's a Scrum or Agile methodology where you will follow this user stories, which can be a small increments, and it's just a Scrum methodology.
ಟಾಪಿಕ್ಸ್ ಕಳಿಸು ನಾನು PPT ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಹುಡುಗರ ಹತ್ರ ಮಾಡಿಸ್ತೀನಿ ಆಮೇಲೆ ನಿನಗೆ ಕಳಿಸ್ತೀನಿ ನೀನು ಅದೊಂಚೂರು ರೆಕ್ಟಿಫೈ ಮಾಡು ಏನಾದರೂ ಮಾಡು ಅಂತಾನೆ ಹೇಳು ಅವನಿಗೆ ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ
So how do you come up with this user stories or evil stories? or requirements, one of them. Finally, output should be either a requirement or they will come up with only evil and user stories, and then you from this you derive the requirements. One of the way.
ಕಳ್ಸಿ ಯಾರು
Yeah.
ಇವನು
Now you have to know how do I
ಅಲ್ಲ
come up with these requirements.
ಹರಿ ಹರಿ ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಯಾವ್ದಾದ್ರು ಕಾಲೇಜಿಗೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೆಲ್ಲ ಮಟೀರಿಯಲ್ ಇಲ್ಲಂದ್ರೆ
And now, if you see, there are the statement is very powerful. All models are wrong, but some are useful. What does this mean? There are several different models exist in
ದಪ್ಪುಗೆಲ್ಲ ಒಬ್ಬ ಇದ್ನಲ್ಲ
simulations. They are not truth. So that's why it's always said most of the models are wrong because they are not realities. They are just in simulation of the actual reality. But they are useful. Yeah. Sometimes you will not have a real practical examples. Then you might have to use those models to come up with requirements. And what are those models? So if you see, I will give you a minute to read this slide, and then we will discuss each of them.
ಮಳೆ ಸೀಸನ್ ಮಾಮೂಲಿ ಈಗಂತೂ ಭಯಂಕರ ಶೆಕೆ ಅಂತಿದ್ರಪ್ಪ.
Hope it's visible for all of you.
ಶಿವಮೊಗ್ಗನೂ ಬಿಸಿಲೆ ಹಂಗ ಶೆಕೆನೆ ಏನು ಅಂತ ಏನಿಲ್ಲ.
Yes, Professor.
So there are different models. Many of you would have used some or maybe heard of them. There are some kind of use case diagrams. There are model diagrams like domain models. Then we have the activity diagrams or sequence diagrams. We have story mapping. We have the component modeling. We have the data flow diagrams. We have attack trees. There are several different models, and many companies use many of them. Means it's not like one model. You can also use multiple models in a project, and sometimes use only one model in one company, and others are not at all touched. So like this, it's possible to apply one or multiple models in a project to derive the proper requirements. Any of you used any one of these models in your work or in your internship or anything you know? Feel free to raise your hand or start explaining one of the model.
ಹಿಂಗೆ ಆಡ್ಕೊಂತ ಇದ್ರೆ ಎಲ್ಲ
Did any of you perform any of this model or use any of this model to do the requirement engineering?
Use case diagram, yes.
Okay. That is one of the most used or mostly commonly used model, where you derive the use cases of the user and then start deriving requirements based on it. There is an model, UML models. I hope you have heard of it. That is Unified Modeling Language. UML model is an kind of a patterning system used to derive the different use cases. And from this use case, you can derive the requirements. Yeah, this is one way to say use cases are nothing but when there is an coffee machine, for example, as a product, then, for example, making a coffee or requesting a coffee is one use case. And then maybe to service the machine is another use case. Refueling, not refueling, the refilling of milk and water and coffee beans is maybe the fourth use case. Like this, you can derive the different use cases of your product. And then for each of those use cases, then you can say, to do this, what I need to implement. To do that, what I need to implement. You can ask this question, and based on the question, you come up with a list of requirements. Yeah, clear? So, in short, we will not go through in detail because ideally for requirement engineering, I will teach them much details. But now, since this lecture is about both requirement and threat modeling, I will concentrate on threat modeling. So, anybody has experience with the domain models? Or activity diagram or sequence diagrams? No? Or maybe the story mapping? this is the most another important thing you should know about story mapping is the one what we just now saw about we will have to create a lot, or when we can create a lot of user stories. Whatever we saw the evil stories and user stories in previous slide, and we can connect the interactions and flow between these user stories. If there are multiple user stories, then you can try to connect them and do the mapping in order to see which user story depends on which user story and how do they communicate, and based on which you can also come up with more requirements in your product. Yeah, one is the requirement from user story itself, because user story itself will give you some requirements. But when you map them between the user stories, then you might get more requirements coming out of it, because you get some kind of an data flow or information flow between them, and then for that you might have to define the new requirement. Yeah. Then activity diagrams or sequence diagrams are nothing but flow diagrams or workflows within the product. What flow should happen when? A simple example of coffee machine, like I gave you to connect physically. If you press a button on the coffee machine to say, I need a coffee, this is the first request. And once this is done, what the machine, the electronic system in the coffee machine will do, it will take a request for a press of the button, it will process it, and then it will say it get to know it's a coffee. And once it knows it's a coffee, then it will fetch what it will fetch? How to make a coffee, there is a recipe, right? Like how when you are making a recipe, you should know what portion of water I should mix, what portion of coffee beans I should mix, what portion of milk I should mix. This is stored somewhere in the system. Then I should fetch the receipt for the coffee or whatever the selected coffee type, cappuccino or latte or whatever type it is, and based on which I will fetch the menu. And then based on this menu, I will decide or give a command to a the milk dispenser, water dispenser, and a coffee grinding machine to create a quantity of my demand. This is my third step. Once I create this, then I will say in which order this has to be put. Because if you put a milk first and then water, and then on top if you put a coffee powder, it will not mix it well. Yeah? That's why if you observe in your coffee machines, when you go and do it, then ideally they are done in some different orders. So first maybe they put beans, or maybe put a first layer of milk, and then they will put a coffee decoction, and then it will put a water, and some maybe again on top a little bit of milk, so that to establish the coffee structure. And this order also has to be defined. Yeah? And then once it finishes, you have to end and display saying coffee is ready, take it out. Yeah, this is a sequence. And in order to have the sequences, you should have different activities defined in the project, and all those activities you should connect to each other, saying this activity should happen first, second, third, fourth, fifth, like this, and then you connect each of them. And based on which you might come up with several different new requirements. It could come up with a timing requirement, or maybe you might come up with different kinds of performance requirements. These are all the outputs of it. But in order to get those requirements, you should do the sequence diagram first. Yeah. So, like I mentioned, you may not apply all models. Sometimes maybe you just do the use case diagrams and that's it. But some critical products, you might do use case diagrams, you might do sequence diagrams, and maybe you will use more than one models. It's up to the product. Yeah. And then the domain model is nothing but a model where you can define different classes based on different business segments. Like it's also possible that if you are running, for example, in your food delivery app, what we discussed, food delivery app, there could be one model for grocery, the food or the menu in the website, and there can be one for complete different business class for payment management. Because in the end, the user has to pay by PayPal or by cash or by bank account. This should be a separate domain model which can perform these functions, and then they are connecting to each other. And this is how you can do the domain models and then connect and identify more requirements. Yeah. Like how do they connect to each other? How do they work each other? This is also one of the good model which you can use. Yeah. Then the fifth model is something called component model, where you will go to some detail level where you identify the different components and do the architecture diagram. And based on this architecture diagram, then you can do some kind of a threat modeling, or you can also come up with more interface or requirements from component model. Yeah. Then the completely different perspective, you can also do data flow diagrams, means you don't care about internal details about each component. Instead, you only look for data, how the data flows from one point to another point in the system. And data flow diagrams can also be, it can show the different processes, data flows, storage, and different entities which are using this data. And based on this, also you can come up with different inputs for threat modeling, and which further can give you more information or more requirements in the end. Yeah. And then the last but not the least, we also have the attack trees. You could, here it is, instead of data or the component, we go from the attack point of view. Yeah. So where we say from an attacker, how the attacker might try as a part of reaching the goal to perform these actions of malicious intent. So the attack trees are looking for from the attack point of view, what attacker can do to achieve his goal. And this is what will help us to understand in detail how he can do. Then we try to stop them in a defense side. So this is also another important method which we use it in threat modeling to perform the attack trees. Yeah. At high level, you should know the different models. You can use one or multiple models in the project based on the need. Yeah. Like I explained theoretically, you can just look. This is an example of use case diagram where there is a customer and there are different use cases like viewing a tour, booking a tour, creating entries, 3 different use cases. And then in the end, from a customer point of view, there can be a payment service, and then there can be a shop owner point of view. There can be different use cases, and you will try to go through each of these use cases and define the requirement for each of them. Yeah, this is an example of use case. Domain models. Here you can break the system into different models like customer is one model, city tours is another, and guest book is one more model, and then booking system itself is another model, another domain, and then you try to show the interaction between these domains. Yeah. Activity diagram, like I said, from the coffee machine, from pressing the button until we dispense a coffee. Here the example is different. You just have to show it in a flow diagram or activity diagram. Sequence diagram is more with respect to time, like which happens in the first order, which happens in the second order, like they should go in the same order. That is a sequence diagram. And then attack trees are nothing but the attacker point of view. How does he achieve his goals? Yeah. In the end, you want to break into your laptop or your PC, what he will do to first get your user ID password, what does he get you to your system credentials, or maybe get into a system, then what does he do to get your data, this finally reaches his goal. Yeah. So this is how we have to do the attack tree and understand that how it works, and based on which we try to block this step, this step, this step, and this step. And once we know all these possible steps are blocked, it's impossible for attacker to achieve the goal. First, we have to identify what he will do. Then we start applying to some controls to stop them. Yeah. And then this attack tree example, like you said, maybe in the real example also, if you see for fuzzing apps, then he goes to the stack-based overflow, and then from there he will deliver some payload, and then once this delivery is loaded, then he will execute the remote desktop. So he has to go through this complete process to achieve his attack. And now as a security engineer, as a defender, I will try to block this one by blocking execution of payload. Means no execution is possible on RAM. I will block this. Then I will try to fix all the buffer overflows and I will block this step. So if there is no buffer overflow possible in my project, then stack-based buffer overflow is disabled or not possible. Then also this attack is impossible. Then I might have some control for fuzzing. If there is somebody try to fuzz my API, I might automatically block them, or I might allow them only for some standard duration or lock them out or whatever. And then like this, I can enter 3 different controls, making the user impossible to do the remote execution. Not the user, the threat actor. This will help me to identify the different paths. Yeah. And then story mapping, like we saw, there can be an use cases. And then you can also map for these use cases the different flows. And then you try to define the different tasks in each of this flow. So this will just get you more and more detailed understanding of your user stories, which will help you to refine the requirements better. This is an example of story mapping. What other model is left? I think this was the 4th model. So story mapping example is here, attack tree is here, sequence diagram, activity diagram, domain model, use case diagram. So any doubts from different models which we saw briefly? Any of you have any questions before we start actually start using these models? Because the next 45-minute session will be on really looking into these models and discussing them. No questions? I can't see your hand. If you raise it, just start speaking. Okay. I don't see any question. Okay, perfect. So let's go to the implementation of one of them so that it's easy. So I think this is an example. I made it to say most important aspect of this is we should write user stories or evil stories based on the models which is discussed above. Yeah. So it can be 2 to 3 students. Then based on the current list, we can make 1 or 2 rooms. And here you have to develop any one of the model. Yeah, it need not be all. Like I said, you can use one or multiple. And then you have to think about different kinds of user stories. And I would expect at least each team uses the different models, not that everybody just does the use case diagrams. And then in the end, you should have describe the model and user story. How to specify? There is a document anyway I can provide you in the end. Yeah. I think I already have it. Yes, I already have it here. So I will provide this in the chat. And then based on which you can derive, for me, 2 is sufficient. One or two evil stories, 1 or 2 user stories and 1 or 2 evil stories. And then that's it. Based on which you can come up with derive one of the model. And then we will discuss on that model. There's an OS standard that you want to read. Okay, so how you want to proceed. So this is an example of how to do, or at least an art web shop. Yeah, it's specialized for buying and selling artwork. Yeah, like a printed photo, like an sketch photos, and there's some designs by the artist. And here, a shop owner only provides the rules for artwork and checks if all artworks sold and placed in the web shop comply with the rules, like there's no violent image or discriminative art and so on. But otherwise, he buying and selling means artist can directly sell and sorry, the artist can sell and buyers can directly buy from there. And the shop owners provides that. Shop owner acts like an Amazon, like they are like a third party vendors. Okay, this is a use case. And for this use case, you're supposed to come up with user stories and one of the model you want to apply. So at least there are one or two user stories and then user stories. And you could use any of these models on these user stories. Either you go with the use case diagrams or you go with, I think that we can already say now, it's better so that you will not, both of you won't do the same one. So we will do 2 batches here. And then batch 1 can take use case diagrams. And the second one can take user story now. Because others anyway, the attack trees we will do during threat modeling, and other models I think we have a chance to look in future. Attack trees we do sequence diagrams, domain models is a bit time consuming, use case and story map. Yeah, others we will anyway do it in the future in different exercises. So for now, one batch can do the use case diagrams model, and another can do the story maps. So any questions here? Any of you? First of all of you are still there. Can you just raise your hands so that I know how many will be participating in the class? There is one who is Anita. Are you still there? Okay, so okay, all of you are there. Then I can automatically assign. Then you can just take these. Maybe let me create, and then we know who is in which room. Room number 1, there are 3, and room number 2, 2. And then you can do at least 2 user stories. Yeah? Stories and 1 evil story is sufficient, or 1 or 2 evil stories. And then room 1 will use a use case diagram. You don't have to do the fancy diagram in the tool. You can also do it in Paint or simple draw.io is the best tool if you want to do the use case diagrams or story maps, or you can use your own tools, whatever you like. Yeah, any doubts from any of you now before I click on start? So we take half an hour, no, half an hour, 40 minutes, and how much ever you are possible to complete, you can complete. And then the last 15 minutes, we will discuss them. And if there is something remaining, then you can continue in the next class. Okay? For now,
Professor, the example that you gave is just an example. We can use any.
no, you can do only on this example so that I know each group how it is doing.
Okay.
So that then it is a much simple.
All right.
Okay. Okay, then I will start it, and in 40 minutes we will. I will be jumping between the rooms, and if you have questions, then you also can just pull me in. And yeah, let me start then.
Adi? Hello, Adi?
Bro, am I audible? Hello?
Yep. Only
What's
two of
up?
us,
What's
huh?
up? Yeah.
Yeah, all good.
Which one shall we do? Which model and how shall we split?
So I was parallelly doing this work. You have to tell me. What do we do? So just now I was thinking he was assigning some task, right? So I paid attention.
Sorry, what?
I was working with on this work student thing. The
Okay. Uh, yeah, I have to figure out something though, right? Because you have to show it to him.
yeah,
Okay, we'll take 5 minutes to go through that thing
Mm-hmm.
via AI and then we'll do it.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back in 5
He has
minutes.
uploaded two PPTs kind of thing, right? Some PDF.
Yeah. So that's what. We'll put that PDF to AI and that example and then we'll ask.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yep.
Cool.
Adi, we are room 1 or room 2?
Again, no idea, buddy.
Because he said uh, room 1 has to come up with some use case or something. Okay, we are room 2. Okay. Okay, I see the main chat league.